Well, welcome to the Discovering Creativity podcast. My name is Kara Cruz, and I am a student in educational psychology at the University of Texas A&M. And we have with us here today Dr. Scott Isaacson.
Well, hi.
Hello, Dr. Scott.
I'm very, very happy to be with you and happy to explore a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is creativity and its deliberate development. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. So my first question for you today is, well, we know all people have potential to be creative, but what is it exactly that helps them become creative?
That's a great question. First of all, implicit in that assumption is that everyone does, in fact, have creativity. Everyone has creative talent. And in order to kind of become more creative or deliberately develop creativity, it takes an attitude or an orientation to creativity that's more productive. And by that, I mean, there is a lot of what I would call myth conceptions about creativity that people can run into. One is that creativity is too mysterious to work on, or it's magical. You shouldn't try to figure out how it works, or that creativity is linked to madness. It's not healthy. I think there's a much more productive set of assumptions that rather than being totally mysterious, that we can define creativity. We can understand what creativity is, that it is something that can be deliberately developed if we look at the process of creativity, and that finally that the release of creativity, the manifestation of creative behavior is very healthy physically, mentally, and some would say even spiritually. So I think it takes an attitude and an openness to know you are creative and know that it's okay to deliberately develop creativity as we go forward.
So we know creativity and innovation go hand in hand, and many organizations, their leadership tries to bring innovation into their organizations, but oftentimes creativity is left out of the conversation. So how can these organizations bring more creativity into the conversation?
I think you're spot on. I think that the word innovation has much more positive valence than the word creativity, the concept of creativity. The interesting thing is that you can have creativity without innovation, but you really can't have innovation without creativity. And that's the relationship that's there. I think people are now beginning to see creativity and innovation as much more intimately related. For example, a lot of people define creativity as the generating of new and useful ideas. And they would define innovation as the execution and implementation of those ideas, particularly in an organizational context. And so it's more results oriented, more focused on outcomes. But to get to those outcomes, it does take a process. And the idea of innovation being excluded from creativity doesn't make any sense, because as you are, yes, creating new and useful ideas is one part of creativity. There's other much more detailed definitions of creativity. But even if we just keep it there and think about innovation as execution, as you start to commercialize, as you start to take ideas into concretation, to product and outcome, and you start to develop them, you have to get sponsorship, you have to get resources. And as you're working through all those issues on innovation, you still need creativity to overcome some of those obstacles that exist on the innovation side of the coin. So these two things are very closely related. The reality is that to make innovation happen, you need to be able to kind of deploy creativity along the process. Some would say creativity is a precursor to innovation. I would say it's not only is it a precursor, but it's a process, and it's a set of characteristics that can play a role all the way through the innovation process as well. They're very closely related. So I think it's a recognition. And in organizations who profess to need innovation, it's interesting that they know they need to work on the development of creativity skills as well.
So one way to kind of help creativity too is CPS tools. So how can organizations appropriately apply CPS tools to effectively facilitate creativity and innovation?
Yeah, I think tools and techniques are a dime a dozen. There are literally hundreds of them. Many of them are digitally available. We can even go into the more current versions of artificial intelligence that's out there as well. But the thing is, tools are tools. And the most important thing I've realized in the last 50 years of working on tools and helping people build skills are when, with whom, and how to use the tools. And for me, that takes on the meaning of facilitation, the management of the process. We know that organizations that excel on innovation and growth invest in a deliberate process. They have a process and a structure. And we also know that if we have people that are enabled to really manage that process, that's the facilitator role, they do much better at deploying the tools. So tools in and of themselves are there. They can be potentially very useful, but any tool use aware of the tool, that have knowledge on the use of tools, when and how and with whom to deploy them and apply them appropriately. That really provides the kind of results that organizations are seeking nowadays.
What ways have you found most useful to measure individual and group creative abilities in companies?
Well, see, the nice thing about working in organizations is they're not what I would call a random population. People who go to work in organizations are usually one, they've applied to join. The organization has done some maybe attraction and certainly some selection of people that join them. So we're not dealing with a random or normal population. So we have found that a very useful way of measuring or assessing creativity has to do with style as opposed to level. Most organizations hire pretty capable people. They have domain knowledge. They're motivated to work. Um, they have a tendency to want to be creative. And so I think what happens here is that rather than looking at how creative are you, we look at how are you creative. We call that style. And we often use the assessment of style to help people connect individually to their own creative talents. People have preferences for different ways of being creative. And so we found a lot of power and a lot of productivity comes from helping people connect personally, whether they are what we call an explorer, someone who prefers to think out of the box, is one thing, which may be the bias we have in creativity, but people who prefer to think within the box to make things better, to develop, to strengthen things, also play a role in the creative process. So when we use this assessment, we try to get people to connect to their own personal preference for how they use their creativity and acknowledge that it really takes the full spectrum, that it takes both kinds of creativity to be valuable, to be productive. And it starts at the individual level. How am I creative? But it's very easy, particularly if everyone plays a role, if there's no inherent better value to one style or the other, value neutral, then everyone feels quite comfortable looking at their group or their team. And they can look for themselves, where are we leaning? Do we have all explorers on board? Maybe we need to have some developers, or maybe we need to learn some tools that help us perform more developmentally to create the balance and the full spectrum of creative talent at work. So we find this notion of style very, very important because, again, it's not, we can assume that people who are working in organizations have certain levels of creativity. They have certain levels of domain knowledge, but it's not just getting the work done. It's how do we get that work done? How do we create conditions for creativity? How do we make sure we have the full spectrum of creative talent available to us as we go forward and work to produce innovation?
Can you give me one example of how companies have used CPS to achieve an innovation breakthrough?
Oh, sure. This is Of the 50 years, 25 of them have been in private practice, where it's been about applying CPS to deliver results for organizations. And the range there is, for example, well, you certainly know about iPhone, and in 2007, 2006, there was an agreement between Apple and AT&T to launch and have exclusive rights to the iPhone. The challenge they had was it's basically a fundamentally new technology, and they had no idea what the needs were in the marketplace. What kind of apps need to be in place to launch the iPhone? And so we were able to come in and help, not just with the people within AT&T, for example, but also to engage consumers and have them explore data, which is part of the creative process, exploring data. And in this case, we were trying to dig deep to find out what kinds of needs do people have about communication. What's their best case communication experience been like? And to extract that data in a way that helped us create concepts. And those concepts then became the first generation of iPhone apps. And by the way, by doing a deliberate process, by capturing that data, we had graphic artists create images of what those needs were and how they could be developed. So ideation was involved, idea generation was involved. And then the idea of strengthening those concepts, evaluating those concepts to support them, was also the use of CPS, so that at the end of the process, they had concepts that came from really deep understanding of the needs into concepts, and then those concepts were also evaluated and strengthened by the consumers themselves. And as a result, it normally took back then about 2 years to get from a concept of an app to an app. And they were able to take those concepts, because of all that work that was done, to get those concepts into apps that in less than 8 months. So the time, cost, and quality was a real result there. And there are many results from product perspective and strategy, but we also were able to use CPS to help South Africa when they were making this huge change that the whole world was watching. We were able to help them understand the importance of facilitation of creative process in solving real community problems. And that helped them make a transition from a police force to a police service. And that's an ongoing project that still lives today, where instead of seeing them as a force to deal with the public, they were seen to be a service to the public. And what they would do is use CPS to solve real community issues and engage the community in doing so. So there's quite a variety of outcomes, both in terms of concrete product, but also in terms of change, good quality social change.
What are the principles or tools of CPS that have the most impact in an organization?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we have to start with almost the basics there. I think one of the things that seems to be really productive is knowing how to separate the idea generation or the generation of alternatives from their evaluation. That's the notion of keeping those things somewhat separate, because they're different cognitive activities and different emotional activities too. So keep separating generating from focusing and evaluation seems to be a principle that plays very well and is very well needed. It's a basic principle that happens in terms of using creative problem solving. But that notion is a dynamic balance between generating and focusing, and keeping both healthy. So it's like two parts of the heartbeat, a boom boom. A healthy generation, we know a lot about what it takes to generate lots of new alternatives, but it also takes a healthy focusing heartbeat, which is how do you take all those ideas and make some sense out of them to a reasonable number of new ideas that maybe require some development, and take on guidelines that help both of those things work really well. So the separation of generating and focusing is clearly a part of it. And then having a toolkit, having a variety of tools at your disposal, and then looking at the contingency. So what kind of creativity do we need here? Do we need exploratory creativity or do we need developmental creativity? Different tools are likely to produce different results. So having a sense of the contingencies to help make those decisions is important. It's the same on the focusing side. There's a contingency there. If you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of ideas, that's one challenge to have. If you only have one or two ideas, you got another challenge, and you may want to deploy different kinds of focusing tools to get those outcomes. You can do, if you only have a few ideas, you better make them work. So you need some really good analytic tools to deepen. If you have lots of ideas, you got to figure out, how do I narrow them down? How do I make some selections? So it's having a toolkit with a variety of tools that you can make decisions about in terms of what's the best tool to deploy. A lot of people have their favorite tool. They're going to do brainstorming regardless of what is required, but there's so many different tools. So having a good, clear choice, the tool is chosen based on its purpose, and then be able to deploy that tool well. So it's separating the two kinds of thinking, having an array of tools and making good choices about when and how and with whom to use those tools, which again comes back to the art and science of facilitation.
How long does it usually take for corporations to train people to become more creative?
Well, the training itself doesn't have to be very long. We used to do of our graduate program and condense it down to 5 days of intensive training. And over the years, organizations' time is very a high valued commodity. So they've tried to even shorten that out of 5 days to 4 days to 3 days. You can deliver the training in relatively short time frames. You can supplement that with digital learning along the way. It's really critical to make the transition from learning about the tools, experiencing the tools, getting those tool sets, the competencies you need at that level. It's very important, though, to make the transition from that to a real life application. And so we will often engage or integrate into our training the use of the tools on practical, real problems so they can get a taste of what it really takes to make that happen. So the training itself doesn't have to be very long. We've seen very good results from a 3-day course on facilitation. The most important thing is making that transition back. Very often people attend the training and then they don't have opportunities to deploy the tools. So they need to kind of create that link back to application. That's where the real value is, when the rubber meets the road, when they go back to their organizations and they try to actually apply the tools. And what we often have done with our organizations that we work with is support that process. Do the training, do the skill development of that, but then be with them to help coach, support, and even sometimes when it's a really hot problem, a really important problem, they want us to facilitate it so they can watch what we do. And that tends to be very helpful. So the training programs can be very short and focused. Making that transition over can take a little while, and that depends a lot on what's going on inside the organization itself.
So, in what ways can leaders implement a CPS process to enhance their group problem solving?
One of the things we've picked up is the importance of what we call clientship, having a good client. And that's someone who kind of owns the problem or the task area that they're going to be working on. And for us, it has three things. There has to be a level of interest, motivation, a level of influence, where they have an appropriate level of authority to deploy something new, and that they also have a need for imagination, that they have a real need for something new. So CPS is good for challenges that are complex, ambiguous, and novel. And so having someone who kind of owns that. Now, from a leadership perspective, we have found that organizations that have good sponsors, good senior leaders who understand the nature of the process, and that it takes a sponsorship role, sponsoring good clients to take on the actual application of CPS so they have the adequate interest, influence, and need for imagination, and then supporting them in making that transition are to really be able to apply those tools. That's critical. So leaders who are good sponsors of the creative process in organizations that have good sponsors, they have amazing levels of success in using creative problem solving.
So we see how all of these organizations are wanting more creative thinking and they're wanting their workers to think creatively and be innovative. But how can we persuade universities to start incorporating more creative thinking courses?
Well, universities play a very important role. One, it's research, and two, it's about education and also some service to the community. And I think the beauty now, 50 years ago, being at a university in a center for studying creativity, when I would talk with some deans about our program, they would say, "Oh, you're a cult on campus." And nowadays you don't have to worry as much because creativity is now seen as a 21st century skill and a life skill. I think there's a tremendous movement over the last 50 years. So I think universities now are, in fact, are the little that we've been able to study the area of university courses. There are many universities now around the world. There used to be just one in Buffalo, and now good universities around the world have already incorporated coursework on creativity in departments of psychology and business and so on. So it's already happening, and organizations, particularly university type organizations, academic organizations, I think that the learning has been, we need to be able to provide learning that is relevant, and science that is relevant. And creativity is now seen as a much more relevant topic. So the diffusion takes some time. Universities can be considered a little slow to change at times, but we have a shrinking college age population. I think organizations need to be able to attract students and promise them that they're going to learn some things in their university context that will be useful for them in their careers and in their personal lives. And creativity fits that need quite well. So I think it's a matter of time. I think we've seen a rapid increase in coursework. We track, for example, the sales of our textbook on creative problem solving. And yeah, it's about 75, 80 countries. In each of those countries, there are multiple universities teaching courses on creativity, not just our textbook, but other textbooks as well. So it's starting to happen, and I think it will continue to happen because of the natural need for the deliberate development over time. I mean, it may take a while. I think I can already see that it's happening across universities of various kinds.
Do you think it is important for organizations to encourage motivation and positivity in order to encourage more innovation?
Yeah, I think that's something we tend to focus a lot, particularly in our private practice. We focused a lot on delivering results, concrete results, profitability, time savings, cost savings, new products, new strategies, and all of those sorts of things. I think one of the benefits that I'm learning, and I can see it in literature as well, that is almost equally important and perhaps even more important, is the notion of well-being. That when people connect to creativity, it's such a healthy, positive, productive thing. And we also know now from the positive psychology movement that as people engage in a positive emotional and motivational spiral, they think better, they problem solve better. When folks go down that cycle to more negativity and so on and so forth, they don't think as well, they don't problem solve as well. And as we go up that positive cycle, it's about emotion, it's about how we feel about ourselves and others. And as that positive cycle moves forward, much more creativity can be released. And I think this is really important because when we think about what's healthy for us mentally, physically, and spiritually, having that positive emotional cycle, that positive motivational cycle, it is extremely helpful, not just for the individual, helpful for teams and groups to work together, and extremely helpful for organizations when it comes to attracting, retaining, developing talent, particularly creative talent. It plays a critical role.
How do you think COVID-19 has shaped the future of innovation in organizations?
Oh, wow. I think something like the COVID, you talk about an unexpected challenge that comes at you. I remember coming back from vacation that year where I was getting ready to teach my course in Norway and traveling from Buffalo to Norway. And within 10 days, the word was, no, we're not traveling. No, we're not going to have a course face to face. We're going to do all of our programming through Zoom. And having to learn within a few days how to master that technology and work digitally and so on. That was my own experience, and that everyone had that experience. You couldn't meet, you couldn't interact, you weren't at work, you weren't at school, and so I think one of the implications is we were all forced to be able to enable ourselves to use digital means for communication, and of course that was a critical factor. Now, what does that mean for creativity? Well, we have to have tools that are enabled digitally, and fortunately they were there, and we had lots of software tools and programs that could be deployed. It took some work to get them friendly to the skills and the full range of tools and techniques, but they're there. And so I think the digital introduction, we all had to, we either we learned how to be more digital or we didn't interact with anyone else. So that was a big implication. It opened up digital facility for interaction and collaboration and communication is one thing. And I think we're still in that process. I think it's going to take a while. We're still in, I mean, going from completely digital to now hybrid working, where some days are spent in school or at work. Because I think organizations know that they need to promote creative collaboration that is also face to face. Digital comes a long way, but it doesn't replace face to face interaction. Humans still need this, which is why I think we're seeing the transition more to hybrid working. All of that has happened. And then on top of that, we add in the parallel work that's been going on for many years on artificial intelligence. So we're already kind of, more of us are playing in the digital space. More of us are learning how to use creativity tools that are more digitally enabled. And then add on top of that, we now have a new partner in the creative process called artificial intelligence. And so it's had I think COVID accelerated the whole digital transformation of creative process. And we're well involved in that now. We have a group in Germany that has a AI lab, and they've already found well over 50 very specific creativity tools that leverage ChatGPT and other aspects of artificial intelligence. And I think the pickup of that, the diffusion of that is very fast, and very fast because of how we dealt with COVID-19 and how we had to interact digitally. So it opened up the arena. So the diffusion's been very quick on that. Maybe in some cases a little too fast, but it's coming very quickly. So it's sped up that digital transformation when it comes to creative process, for sure.
Now, you mentioned virtual and hybrid work environments, but how are these environments beginning to be the norm for most organizations? And what are some of the opportunities and challenges for creativity in the workspace?
Well, I think this is a learning curve for a lot of organizations, is how to manage the balance of face-to-face interaction and digital interaction, which is the essence of hybrid. And the thing is, I think what happens is the creative process. Remember, I think the basis of it for me has always been creativity starts at the individual level. It starts with me. It starts with you, and it comes to how we think about what the opportunities are. And so, and this is a natural kind of process that happens quite often. And so it starts with me. Now, I can interact with others via this kind of technology and start to communicate and collaborate and share, whether it's discovering a really important problem space, getting clear on that, or whether it's generating some ideas, or whether it's taking ideas and improving them and honing them ready for application and execution. And I can do that on my own. I can do it through technology, and I can do it face to face. There are some parts it's likely, and we don't know yet. We have a lot of research to do on this. There are some parts of that creative process and some of the journey that's a creative process where some face to face work is almost indispensable, where it really is key to be able to, as human beings, we read a lot. You think about kids who pick up within seconds whether someone's friendly or not, right? We pick up a lot of information by sharing time and space together. So there may be critical parts of that creative journey where it requires good quality face-to-face interaction. And there are other parts of the journey that could be even better done and accomplished via a digital space or partnering with AI along the way. And I think this opens up a set of challenges for research to understand better what parts of the ideation and creative problem-solving journey are best served real-time face-to-face, and what parts are much better handled through a digital or individual manner, and then preparation for interaction later. And of course, it's going to depend a lot on a lot of factors. This is not easy research. It depends a lot on the kind of task you're working on, the kind of organization, where the industry it's in. There'll be a lot of factors that are involved there, but it seems reasonable that the hybrid model is going to be the model we're going to have to learn how to make work really well. The good thing is a lot of work has been done. So much work has been done on the basic tool set, the basic guidelines, the basic language that helps people. For example, if you don't give ChatGPT a really good prompt, you get garbage as a response. So the language you use is important, because language is large language basis for a lot of the algorithmic work of artificial intelligence. So it doesn't replace, and we have a good foundation for learning the basic skills, the basic language, the basic guidelines, and even some basic science about facilitation of teams and groups. That's all good, and it can be readily applied to either digital working or face-to-face working. So we have a great foundation upon which to build, but we have a lot of needed research and inquiry and playing around with these things to see at what parts of the journey is it better to be face-to-face? What parts should we be leveraging AI? What parts do we need to just allow some digital contribution? And is it synchronous or is it asynchronous? So all those kind of questions, those are yet to be answered. But the good news is we have a good foundation. We can actually begin to do some of that inquiry, because so much work has been done on some of the basics in creative problem solving.
How do you build an innovative culture and maintain a sense of connection within an increasingly digital work environment?
Well, I mean, that's the monitor that, or the language that everyone, we need a culture of innovation here. We hear that all the time. First of all, culture as a concept is deep. It is about values. Sometimes they're implicit. They're about basic assumptions about what's appropriate here. And as such a deep concept, it tends to be very difficult to change. So an organizational culture likely already exists. And if we want a culture for innovation, usually people are asking for, we need people to behave more creatively. Back to your earlier question around innovation versus creativity. And so to get innovation happening in an organization, we need to be looking at climate, which is patterns of behavior. People can learn new language. They can learn new skills. They can learn new behaviors. And so culture and climate are kind of linked. Culture is the deeper concept, and climate's the thing that can change more readily. We know from training a number of things that can happen to impact climate. And so the atmosphere, it's what people experience when they're together. Second part of your question is what is the experience together? Well, if it's face-to-face, we have a holistic experience to observe and know what the atmosphere is like. What is the atmosphere like in a digital context? To some extent, it depends on the technology. Some technology is better than others, although you can see, regardless of whether you're using WebEx or Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, the technology seems to be standardizing. We can get real-time audio, visual, we can share documents, we can work on documents together. So that's interaction. But it's a little different than when it's fully face-to-face. So far, the research we have suggests that the hybrid working is still something we assess climate, for example. We have a measure that assesses climate. And in the last few years, as we've seen more and more hybrid working, we see similar results in climate. People are still picking up an understanding of how, for example, you and I are interacting right now. Am I listening? Am I trying to respond appropriately? Are you smiling, or am I depressed? We still interact, so we can still assess the kind of climate that we are establishing here in a digital world. And we can confirm that when we have our face-to-face interactions. And so I think it's still the basic idea of a climate that's conducive in order to have a culture of innovation, whether we are full-time face-to-face, full-time digital, or taking on a hybrid sort of working arrangement. The fact is climate still exists. And then it becomes, how do we see it? What's working well? What might need some improvement? And then how do we go about making those improvements? So I think organizations that are taking it upon themselves to do deliberate climate creation help to create a culture for innovation.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and answer my questions today.
It's my pleasure.
I've enjoyed getting to hear your insight on both innovation and creativity.
Well, thank you, Kara. Thanks for asking the questions. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So happy to be here and happy to help.
Thank you.